And we're live.
Yeah, hello.
Hall and Hutch.
Hall and Hutch. Great to be here.
It's awesome to be here. I'm sitting in Hutch's home on his couch, and we are recording our first podcast on the prevalence of neurodiversity amongst leaders, specifically actually ADHD, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah. I found out I was ADHD 26 years ago and haven't really talked openly about it. I've started to this year online, but this is my first big reveal. And you're new to this.
Yeah, I'm new to this.
Trend.
Yes, yeah. I was diagnosed with ADHD last year on the back of my daughter suggesting I did have a diagnosis, because it transpires that my grandson was diagnosed with ADHD and Tourette's. My son had Asperger's. I don't know about my father, but I suspect he died when I was very young. So I've got no idea, but I suspect because of his behaviour, he showed all the signs.
Yeah.
But the thing that has struck me, because most of my life I've spent in creative businesses, in advertising in particular, but also I've been involved in 9 startups and things that have grown out of nothing. But when I was at Saatchi's, one of the things that really it always puzzled me was why it was so hard for creative people to sell ideas to non-creative people. And we got a psychologist to come and spend almost a week in the agency, and there was no particular brief for her. But we said, look, just observe how we behave. We'd like it. It's an observational tool, which of course ADHD is. There's no scientific genetic test. You can't sort of take a blood sample and say, oh, you've got it. There might be some DNA triggers, but it's too early days in terms of the analysis and discovery of ADHD to know that. But I do know that something like 40% of Rhodes Scholars have ADHD, and 70% of Rhodes Scholars have ADHD, and 40% of CEOs of the top Fortune 500 companies have ADHD. And it's that diversity that enables them to think differently and think quickly. And for example, in the military, the US military, they don't medicate for ADHD. They want people who will act fast and
take a risk. Yeah.
Use their instinct. Yep.
I've always been fascinated. I mean, I discovered when my son, who was 8 years old, like a lot of people are discovering when their child gets diagnosed, and I'm reading the symptoms and what it means, and I'm thinking, oh, that seems quite familiar. I was a daydreamer in school. I always have little dinghy car accidents. I actually tripped up 2 boys on the mat my first day at primary school, because actually I had 2 older brothers, and that's just what you did. But, that risky behaviour was already happening. And luckily for me, apart from those wild teenage years, I sort of took relatively healthy risks. And so I'd kind of landed on my feet in my career and gotten into leadership roles where I was dealing with conflict and trouble and ER issues and head of PNC. And I loved all of that. It just lit me up, and I found it easy to do my job when I was like that. But if it got boring and everything got all sort of too bland, I would have to go do something new to stir it all up again.
Yeah.
And I guess in agency work and Colenso, Saatchi and Saatchi's, you would have been dealing with all sorts of risky portfolios.
All the time. And you're living on the edge of uncertainty the whole time. You don't know what's going to happen next, but you do have those insights. And it's, sure, there's a layer of intelligence, there's a layer of learning and knowledge that you go through, but in the end it's instinct that gives you the ideas, and instincts and good ideas aren't a function of time and effort. They're a function of insight, and those insights, I think, occur with 2 people who are neurodiverse, who just think differently. They use their instincts rather than their intelligence. And when we'd finished, when Rebecca, the psychologist, had finished her week with us at Saatchi's, she put us through Myers-Briggs profile. And it turned out that the entire senior team were on the intuitive side of the ledger. And those not familiar with Myers-Briggs are either non-intuitive, intuitive, introvert, extrovert. There's a lot of subsets within that, and I won't go into it. But you can check it out yourself online if you want. But it turned out that all the senior team, barring the CFO, were on the intuitive side of the ledger.
As, of course, the CFO would be. He'd be the ISTJ probably.
We were all N's, intuitives.
Yeah.
S's.
Snap, by the way. ENTP.
Yeah. Anyway, so I thought, well, that's interesting, but how does that help? And she said, The problem there is that only 24% of the population, less than a quarter of the population, is intuitive. So, in other words, the ideas come from people who use instinct and intuition rather than knowledge and follow the bouncing ball. And I thought, heck, that makes a huge difference. And if you overlay that, for example, with IQ testing, and I don't know, I've been through so many barrages of IQ tests over my career, I don't know which way's up, but I know that I'm up there. I know that mine's in the high 130s. I've done 4 tests, and it's always been 135, 138. So I just know that's where my head resides, and its ability to think stuff, but also in terms of intuition. I think in pictures, and I think in words, and so that those are the bits that stood me well in analysing, to be able to come up instinctively with poetry, alliteration, beauty, all those things that you do. And I just think now, when you overlay that with people who can actually think critically, if you, for example, take a slice through the population at large on an IQ basis, and you hope your leaders are up there. Yeah. Leadership doesn't come from the bottom end of the IQ scale. Leadership comes from the top end. Yeah. But you do want your leaders to kind of know what they're doing. And they know what they're doing because they've got the brains to handle it. But you also want a leader who's got ideas. You want a visionary, someone who can lead you somewhere. And think back through history. All the great leaders have been great storytellers. They've not only been high IQ, but they've been also highly creative. And
so that leads to the other piece here about New Zealand as well, which we're not sure, because there is no really good solid data about New Zealand, but we know that New Zealand is populated by pioneers. Whether they came out in a canoe or a boat, they're pioneers, and they were risk takers. They wanted to come all the way to the ends of the earth to discover something new and populate a new country. So the DNA debate tells us that actually our DNA is that of a risk taker.
I think you're right, and I also think, I'd love to get some research started on this whole concept. But as he just said, I mean, if you came in a Waka 800 years ago, or a sailing ship 180 years ago, or an Airbus 5 minutes ago, the reason you'd come to live in a country that's the furthest away country of any other country in the world requires hope and courage. Yeah, and so it's guts. You imagine, the first Maori who arrived here, when they settled, you can imagine that their family, their peers, would have been left back in Hawaii because they didn't have the courage to come. To get on a waka and paddle for days, weeks, and believe me, I've sailed from here to Fiji, for here to me. I know how tough it must be. And how much tougher it must have been when you didn't have a compass, when you didn't have...
But even when you look back at that, they would have chosen the fittest, and the fittest would have been the ones that I say have got pointy bums. Now, that's me. I could not sit still, and even though I'm the AD non-hyperactive D, it's the thing I really struggle with, is sitting still for a long period of time. I want to move. I actually found when I was working, and the minute the mobile phone came along, it was a real freedom for me, because I could do my job on the phone and I could walk up and down like all the executives were doing. Everybody was walking up and down talking on the phone, and it made me look at them and think, they can't sit still at a desk very long with that. But I was just piecing it together, and because I didn't want to come out about being ADHD, I didn't want it to become a career limiting move for me. I couldn't talk openly about it. I could talk about my son. And actually, he was great, because he was my biggest lesson. I learnt so much from him. Because what I watched with my son is the fact that he was really high empathy. He could read the room. He could pick up on weird dynamics, and he would immediately try and shift and change it in some way, which is also something I see with the autism spectrum disorder, that they pick up on group dynamics, but in a completely different way. So I think all the research that I've done helping my son learn has been around understanding their propensity for risk, understanding how that affects their sympathetic nervous system so they don't get too anxious all the time, then understanding empathy and boundaries so that they are healthy and solid, because if you're someone who picks up on other people's feelings because you've got lots of mirror neurons, we now have neuroscience that tells us that, you need to know how to have really good boundaries. And you also need to know how those work in group dynamics and how group dynamics can affect you so that you can get into flow. And then what happens when you hyper-focus, which is actually the amazing strengths. I can remember you talk about IQ test, doing an IQ test, and they made me sit it 3 times. And they said, we've never seen a profile like this. It keeps coming through the same, though. And so they actually ran the testing company. I was in a psychometric testing business doing this test for them. So we've got to check this. And I said, why is that? I said, well, you're an absolute idiot mathematically, but you're a genius. You're Mensa bright on verbal reasoning.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I bet you all my ex-husbands would agree.
My father's an English and French teacher, and I think he despaired of me because I was just hopelessly ridiculous at maths. In fact, in school cert time, I walked out of I could do arithmetic and geometry because that's about drawing, but algebra and sets I just couldn't stand it at all. Just didn't do it, and still now, my wife's always handling the finances. I don't even have a bank account of my own. I'm not good with that sort of stuff. For me to see a spreadsheet is just boring. There are people who do that though.
I do it out of sheer necessity, but I hate it.
And I did accounting for a couple of years in order to make myself do it, so I can read a balance sheet, and I know all the things you need to know.
Yeah,
to know there's more money coming in than there is going out. But I don't know, the details of discounted cash flow and all that sort of stuff. I don't need to know the detail. I just need to know there's more money coming in. And the ideas come in because we've got good ideas. Sorry, the money comes in because we've got good ideas. And so I'm about ideas rather than looking forward for new ideas rather than looking back to see how much money we've made.
So how has having an ADHD diagnosis affected you? Talk us through that journey. Since you got the diagnosis, what difference has it made in your life?
It's made me reflect about decisions I've made. As I say, I've been involved in 9 startups because once I've achieved something, I get next. And also my 3 marriages, I perhaps would have approached those differently or not entered into them had I known what my propensity was. It's not that I've been a philanderer. I just there have been times when I've exhausted that thing, and I now know that there is with ADHD, there is a thing called emotional dysphoria. So that I suspect, and thinking back on my relationships, I actually feel stronger and deeper in terms of that love quotient than most people do. Why? Yeah. I've exhibited behaviour that would indicate that I feel it stronger than most people.
That's a really interesting point you raise. There's also this propensity towards rejection sensitivity disorder, which means that you pick up, because you read the room so well, but you also pick up on the nuances of what's happening for the other person. And the thing that I've experienced is I've been so able to tune in on someone else that I've forgotten to tune in on myself. So it's been really easy for me to actually allow myself to get hijacked by that other person, which actually ultimately doesn't work very well.
No.
They think they're having the best experience of their life because I'm behaving in exactly the way they want me to, because I'm picking up on their needs, but I'm not looking after myself as a result. And it's a relief to be in a relationship where I actually am able to do that for once in my life. But it's interesting. I think all of these things are neurological differences. Now, I know that when I first discovered, I read everything I could around the subject, and I found out that the medical experts really differ to what actually some of the thought leaders think. And my annoying dog has got a squeaky toy. And so the medical experts think that it's a disability very firmly, that it needs to be medicated, that it's always going to be a challenge all your life. But there's an awful lot of neuroscience research that's coming out now. Look at the captains of industry who are largely somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And actually, if it's treated as a difference and you learn the difference between your spiky profile as opposed to a neurotypical profile, which is probably midway all the way around. We've got spiky profiles, so we're what you call twice exceptional. We're exceptionally good at one thing, exceptionally disadvantaged at another. So in our case, is ironically, we're exceptionally good at verbal reasoning, not so great at mathematics. Yeah. Visual people, creative, more on the creative end of the spectrum than on the give me the same job over and over and over again. Yeah. But if you can understand it and navigate it as a difference, and you work from a strengths-based model, actually, I've come to the conclusion in working with my son, who's now an awesome builder, that actually it can just be a difference. And you can navigate the world as effectively with some nuances, certainly, but it works really, really well. We wanted to finish up with a quick close from us. So we are here with Dixie, who is being very camera shy right now. And my dog was running around in the background over there. Alf is not wanting to be on camera at all, which is very unusual. But we wanted to just finish by saying we're starting this series where we're going to interview various leaders. We're going to tell lots of stories, what we hope will help you. Our whole motivation is to help you understand if you have got a child who's ADHD or a child who's got a diagnosis, or you have a loved one, or you yourself have a diagnosis and you've yet to tell anyone about it. I know it's coming out online. Everyone's talking about it on LinkedIn now, but there's this kind of funny little gap. We've got the younger generation that are getting really comfortable talking about it, which is super, super, super awesome. They understand their superpowers. There's a lot more education and knowledge out there now. And then we've got people of our generation, Hutch, and can I just say we are of an ilk that we don't give a damn anymore.
Exactly.
And so we can talk about it openly. And I think our aligned passion, that's right, Dixie, is that we want to get this information out so that we want to dispel the myths for those of you who are in that quasi-twilight zone of having this diagnosis but not wanting to share it because you don't want it to be a career-limiting move.
No.
And that is real. Look, I know that I was dismissed from a very big organisation, and I won't say the name of it, but it was probably because I had actually dared to tell my manager I was ADHD, which was not something I did very often, and I think it was just too overwhelming. But that's okay. I lived and learnt from that, and it didn't kill me, and it certainly didn't slow my career down in any way. So, I think as a woman, I know that if you've got an ADHD diagnosis and you're in an executive role, you're feeling tough enough as it is, having to be dealing with that glass ceiling, than wanting to share a diagnosis like that, because there's so much misinformation out there about it. So, Hutch, over to you. Tell us your reason for sharing your journey and your story.
Well, I think that it's having a diagnosis has been terrific, enabling me to reflect on what I've done, the decisions I've made. But it's also quite freeing. And I'm at a stage of my life now, I don't care. I mean, I don't rely on anyone's largesse, anyone's decisions. I've carved my own. In fact, I realised at a very early age, not knowing that I had ADHD, I realised that I'm not particularly good in team situations or big organisations, and that's not my gig. I'd rather carve my own path. Yeah. And I think if I'd been in the Wild West, I'd have been a frontier scout. I wouldn't have been in the army.
Yeah.
And I think that to me, and I own it. Just own the way you think. And I've had to probably start my own businesses just to have a job. Because I'm not, I think I'm pretty much unemployable by any large organisation because I'd wreck it. And then in the end, not being difficult, I think I'm a pretty easygoing sort of a guy. But I just hate fools, I hate stupidity, and I don't like sameness, because and I like playing on the edge, and because change always happens at the edge. A change never happens in the centre where you're safe. You've really got to take a risk. And I think that all those attributes I now realise that really are because of my ADHD has enabled me to start new things. The downside is I was told I had no stickability when I was younger.
Serial entrepreneur.
Yeah. And I've made a lot of money. I've lost a lot of money. I've had a few marriages, but I've had fun, and I've done new things. I've written books, and I've raced cars, I've raced planes, I've jumped out of planes, I've raced boats, and I love doing things. I love the richness of life, and just I think own it, because the big changes in life happen really with people who are neurodiverse, and that's what we want to basically talk about and enable people to feel comfortable talking about it and finding where their strength is, because we believe it's a blessing, not a curse.
We think it is absolutely a blessing, that it is a cognitive difference, that it is not a disability. It, of course, can be that if you're trying to be fitting into a neurotypical world, if you're able to carve out a life where you can use your strengths, your spiky profile, and work out what your absolute strength is, and everyone has a unique series of strengths, and then you can actually scaffold your strengths up against the challenges. So there's so much we want to share and talk about. We're going to be sharing stories, and now Dixie's decided that she's out. I just want to make sure that she doesn't tear the laptop out in the process. So she's being very, very elegant. But this whole story that we want to share in a series, we've got people like Brad Hooker who are going to come on and talk openly, Ralph Booth. We've got some amazing thought leaders who are going to come and share their stories. And as we do that, we'll be sharing little anecdotes out of our own stories with the motivation of wanting to help you live your best life and also feel brave enough to come out about what might be your neurospiciness or diversity. And so this is a series that we're starting. It'll probably be once a month. And given it's taken us 3 takes to get this one right, Hutch, let's hope that we don't spend the next month trying to do the next one. But we possibly will. Yeah. Because we didn't read the manual, really, did we? We just jumped in, boots and all, and got into it. And we look forward to getting your feedback. Our dogs will feature in these shows. I think it'll be Alfie's turn next time. And we look forward to sharing our dogs, because our dogs are important with us, aren't they?
And if you can't talk to them, talk to your dog. Dixie loves it.
Over and out.